And I can remember visiting a location in Queens where we wanted to put a Walmart, and there was a dirt lot with a chain link fence around it. And that's what New York City wanted more than they wanted a Walmart.
Hey everybody, welcome in another edition of Radical Content. My name's Eric Gray. We're excited to have a buddy of mine, kind of been a mentor at times. Our guest today is Chad Mitchell, former Senior Director of Digital Comms at Fortune 1 Walmart, now Vice President of Comms, Public Affairs, and Digital Platforms at TD Bank. It's super, and also a big Penn State fan, in case you can't tell by his sweater, and he's got tons of other things if you would turn the camera to the right. But what's up, man? How are you doing today?
Doing great. Glad to be with you. And you got Cowboys in the background, which is my professional love interest. So, we're all good.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in the right place. Well, man, I really appreciate the time. We've gotten to know each other for a few years now, kind of been a mentor at times, and just followed your story from Walmart and now to TD Bank. But today is going to be maybe different than some of the episodes that we do, because you are like Mr. Corp Comm Storytelling. I don't know if that's the official title, but that's what I say. And so anytime I'm talking to people that are doing corporate communication storytelling, I'm like, you got to meet my friend Chad, or you got to see what Chad did, or let me ask Chad about that. And so today that's what it's going to be about. Like, Radical Content is really trying to uncover all sorts of awesome content that's happening, whether it's creator, whether it's a broadcaster. Hopefully it's going to be a lot of brands that are doing it from a consumer standpoint. But today, corporate comms is different. Your audiences are different. Your strategies are different. And so I'm super stoked to kind of get in there and kind of break this open, because it's a world that I've touched on, but I haven't touched on it much. And all I know is that my PR friends they're super good at this, and they're very particular. And so I'm just excited to dive in, and get into this. So my first question, which is a little bit different, kind of set this up and let people know you a little bit, other than your love for Penn State. How did a kid who grew up loving politics, interning on the Hill in D.C., become an executive content leader for places like Walmart and TD Bank?
I have no idea. It's a great question.
Our next question.
Yeah, next question. No, it all really goes back to, I think, what I was trained to do when I went to Penn State, which was, I majored in journalism, and I struggled. It was difficult. It was very competitive, and there were a lot of sort of procedures and structures that our professors wanted us to follow with regards to being edited and having drafts, and none of that really went with my style at the time. I was very process averse. I've come to learn over my career that process can be your friend as long as you don't over process things. But at the time, I was really struggling with that, and really fell in love with politics, and sort of found my career notch or my comfort level sort of in the political arena, working on campaigns, worked in the State House in Richmond. But the backbone of all of those jobs was communications and was writing. So yeah, I could figure out how to get volunteers deployed to an event or how to raise money, but it all came back to, can you write? And really, as my career evolved, and I was at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for a while, and then I left there to go to a trade association, or to an agency, where I was really able to sort of flex some different muscles. And I think I realized at that point how much I just loved creative, and how much I loved thinking about creating new content. And really, when I left the chamber, it was an attempt to sort of turn the DC environment upside down in terms of the ways that political communications are done, and that the ways constituents respond to their elected officials. And had a great time doing that. And then Walmart came and recruited me, and that was obviously an opportunity to lead the digital communications team and relocate to Bentonville. I jumped at it, and really the job description at that point was to oversee the corporate website, which sounds a little boring probably, but when you're Walmart and you've got 40 million unique visitors to your corporate website, not walmart.com, but like to your corporate website, that's a pretty big audience. And from there, we were able to evolve into storytelling, the sort of existential reputational threats that Walmart was going through every day. sort of forced a new way of
Yeah.
thinking around the way we were communicating, and that press releases and one-way communication from the company really wasn't going to work, and we needed to own our narrative. We needed to have a contrary point of view to what the critics of our brand thought, and I think we all gravitated around
Yeah.
storytelling. That's where my sort of journey pivoted into brand storytelling, brand journalism, creative, and then did that for 8 years at Walmart, and then ended up at TD in a very similar role. And so moving from retail to banking, not the least bit similar. So the regulatory environment on, a pharmaceutical or a bank is completely different than working for a retailer, but it's been a fun journey. And again, it sort of all goes back to that journalism degree and ability to write, and then you've picked up social media along the way, and I was there when you did letter writing campaigns, and then we went to blast faxes, and then all of a sudden email came along, and
well,
then
don't
social
age yourself,
media.
Chad. Come on, let's calm down.
No, I'm not afraid to. I've been around the block a time or two.
No, well, so look, it's a great story. And one thing that I love about people that are in these worlds of communication, whether you're social, you're a brand storyteller, whether you're corp comms, agency side, they've all have some sort of unique beginning, right? For me, it was sports radio and then into gaming before I even really knew what marketing was. And so many of them are journalists, right? I know Lou, who's a friend of ours, is now has a podcast where he's talking about former journalists that got into communications from a brand standpoint. And I love all of those stories. But I will say people that are in corporate communications come from the political side. They're usually really good PR people. They understand how to build a narrative. I know some of my friends at Universal that were in PR. They were so good at crafting narratives and creating stories and angles. What makes a great corporate communication story? When you're sitting there trying to, whether it's something for, and we'll talk about TD stories in a minute, but whether it's something for Walmart or TD Bank, or even back in politics, what is the kind of the framework of something that you're thinking about as you're analyzing and getting pitched ideas, or thinking about something to put out there to convince people?
Yeah, I think it's two things, Eric. It's really making sure that what we want to talk about lines up to the needs that our audience has. I think that where corporate communications folks can go wrong, and with PR folks can go wrong, is that you've got 100 things you want to talk about as a company, and maybe only 2 of them are relevant to the people you're actually talking about. So it's that Venn diagram of what we want to talk about lining up to our audience's needs, to our customers' needs.
We've built that slide before.
Yeah, and the second piece to me is every story to me has got to be about somebody other than the bank or somebody other than Walmart. It was more about what we were able to do to help facilitate somebody's journey as a colleague, or in Walmart, we called them associates, but like, what have they been able to do through maybe a benefit we've offered, or by volunteering in their communities, or what have some of our community groups been able to do with a grant? So, we gave them a grant, but they've now benefited the lives of 1,000 children who, needed mental health awareness, which is something we just did up in Maine. But that's the angle that I look for. I think that I naturally gravitated toward Walmart needing to be the hero of every story when I got there, and I think the same is true with politics. I mean, politics, it's really narcissistic in terms of it better be your candidate that you're talking about,
right?
And what they've done. So the story is usually about yourself or about your candidate. So then transitioning into Walmart can't be the hero of every story. Number one, we didn't have a reputation where that was believable. So we needed to talk about sort of the empowering we were doing of the people that we worked with. And so I think the same is true when I look at TD or when I look at any brand story. And I think, that's an amazing story. Commercials that I watch, social that I watch, it's not necessarily about the brand. It's about the real heroes, the real people that they've just been able to be a small supporting.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that is the natural inclination, right? It's like, we're the hero. The brand is the hero. How do we find a way to convince other people that we're the hero, right? So that's just the first step. And then as you navigate and get into your career, you start to realize that's not how you build perception of the brand. That's not how you create content people actually want. So let's stay with Walmart a little bit. You mentioned it a couple times. I read a blog, and I've got it pulled up right here, and it's from March 2nd, 2014. You know what this blog is? It's titled Telling Walmart's Story, and the author is Chad Mitchell, which is, by the way, freaking crazy. This is Fortune 1. Your name and your face is attached to the blog that's launching to tell the story of the biggest company in the world. So my question here, and we'll get into more of the content, but I got a fun question first. Take me inside the room. What was it like when someone pressed publish on that, and all of a sudden, like, I've launched brand blogs before, but it wasn't for Walmart. Take us inside the room and tell me a little bit of what that moment was like, what that day was like.
For me, every time we did something like that, or I would do a podcast or an interview, I always felt great when it was over. And then the next day, when it showed up in our clips report that everybody got in their inbox at 6:00, is when I would have the panic attack, because it was like, did I really say that? How did it come across?
Yeah.
There was one that came along later on when we launched our podcast that we called Outside the Box, where the whole concept was bringing together strange bedfellows who Walmart probably nobody thought had any business. Like, why is Walmart talking to these people? Like, you're not cool enough to be in the room with those people. And that was sort of the idea. And Fast Company did a piece that said something along the lines of, it's the most un-Walmart podcast ever. And I was like, oh crap, when this comes out tomorrow in the clips, like, I'm being given budget to push forward Walmart, and yet now they're saying this is the most. And I got rave reviews. Like, I freaked when I saw the clips. So the same thing when we launched Walmart Today, which was. It was, I don't know that we were the first. We certainly weren't, because, Ashley Brown, who's been a bit of a mentor and an inspiration to me, was at Coca-Cola and then went to Amazon. We stole this whole playbook.
Totally.
They basically, they basically took over the old Coca-Cola corporate website and redid it with a blog. And we did a lot of best practicing and benchmarking with Ashley. I ended up hiring somebody off of his team. We had her run social media for us, but it was a bit unproven at Walmart. It was new. I don't know how many people in the company knew we were doing it. So I'm sure there were some people who said, oh, what is going on here? But you're in the room and you hit publish and you kind of hold your breath and wait and see. The everybody who needed to sign off on it signed off on it. That was the good news. But it wasn't one of those things that we socialized, I think, broadly across the company at the time.
Yeah. All right. So let's stay here for a second.
Sure.
It's Walmart 2008. You come in 2009, I think, right? So in 2008, they just done the big rebrand. I forget the tagline, but it's save money, live better, right?
Yeah.
And there's also, you kind of mentioned at it a little bit, or hinted at it a little bit in this chat. There's also some real brand perception issues, right, at Walmart at the time. And I know I watched a lot of that, and we've talked a little bit about it. But for the audience, kind of tell us a little bit about how content helped you try to go after some of these real challenges that Walmart was dealing with from a brand perception standpoint. How did you tackle that with content? And then I want to open up a couple specific examples before we move over to TD Bank.
Yeah, it's a good question, Eric. And for the first couple of years, I don't think the content was working to effectively battle back the perceptions. And I think the reason for that is we didn't know what they were. We just knew that there was this noise in the system. There were obviously a lot of people in organized labor who wanted to see Walmart unionized. There were manufacturers who thought we bought too much stuff from China. There's sort of, there's neighborhood communities who, when Walmart comes in, it's a big footprint, right, for a Walmart. And so I don't think, looking back on it, and it was 2010 when I got there, and for the first couple of years, was trying to cite stores. And I can remember visiting a location in Queens where we wanted to put a Walmart, and there was a dirt lot with a chain link fence around it. And that's what New York City wanted more than they wanted a Walmart. And it was a bit of an eye-opening experience for me, but I still didn't know why. Like, what was it? And
Right.
that's when our EVP, who ended up coming in, we really spent a lot of time, not through me, through a completely different team who gets all the credit for this, but they did a ton of focus grouping, they did a ton of surveying to really understand what they were. And it came down to three things. It was that we bought too much stuff from China. It was that we treated our associates poorly, and that we were putting mom and pop out of business. At the time, we knew that 2/3 of everything that was in a Walmart store came from domestic manufacturers. So, yeah, the perception was you could go in the store and pick up something from China, but the majority of the product was locally based. We knew that there was a different side of the story to the way that we treated associates, and I think Amazon had a lot to do with the idea of putting mom and pop out of business. To be quite honest,
Sure.
I think we all love to go down to Eric's hardware store and support our local, hardware guy, or when we want to go to local restaurants instead of franchises. But sometimes that means you're paying $15 for a hammer you can get for like $4 on Amazon. And so like Amazon sort of neutered that one. So we really had two things: the treatment of our colleagues, and then the idea of domestic manufacturing. Around that time, you can still see what Walmart does today. You need to take just one look at their website to see how they've doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on. They have something called Open Call, where all of these U.S. manufacturers come and bid to get their products on shelves, and then they continue to put forward all of the things that they're doing to empower and better the lives of their colleagues today. So once you have the research and you know what problem you're trying to solve, then it was very easy to develop content and to create videos and to create all of the collateral that we needed that addressed those two fundamental issues, because otherwise we were searching in the dark to find the content that was dispelling the negativity.
Yeah, I love that. That's where you started, right? We need to understand our audience. We need to understand the problems that we're trying to solve before we jump behind a camera or start writing scripts. A lot of creative content people can feel like, oh, we've got it. Let's just go make stuff. And so I love that that's the first place you landed. There are two things that you kind of spoke about. One, I'll just kind of mention here because you already kind of talked about it, but highlighting associates and employees has been a tremendous change over the past decade. And you've noticed that in any sort of Walmart advertising. If you go to their YouTube channel, it still is a thing. And so that's, one of the things you talked about. But if you go back 6 years ago, there was a content series called Made by America that Walmart did on YouTube. And I loved this one. I always have loved this one. And the thing it really was pointing at is what you talked about, right? Is what's being made domestic, a little bit of mom and pop. And how can we showcase the fact that we're in relationship with our communities? We're not actually against our communities. Really great, rich storytelling. Were you there when that campaign or that content series started?
Yeah, my recollection is that there was really a joint initiative between marketing and corporate communications. Marketing took some of the flagship advertising that you saw on TV. So there was a Dream On. We had the soundtrack for Dream On. It was about reopening manufacturers. I think the VO was from Micro, and then the stories, some of the smaller profiles that you're talking about, where we featured a company that made coolers, all of the sports flags. I think that it's called WinPro. So that was our team that we were able to dispatch to local manufacturers who we had a whole team inside the company who worked with these folks. They were able to identify them. I think when it comes to content, whether we get to this or not in the call, one of the toughest things is sourcing the stories, right? Like, where do you get the stories? You're a content team. I know what kind of story I want to tell, but where in the world does it come from? I honestly believe, Eric, that when you've got 2.4 million associates that Walmart did around the world, and you've got 2/3 of the U.S. population stepping foot in your store each week, that we could have written a cast, we could have scripted a story that would be for Hollywood, that we could have gone and found that
story, right?
We could have found it. We could have gone to any one of our 4,000 store managers and said, do you have a person that does this? And the answer would be inevitably yes. And
did you find a solution to actually find those stories?
Yeah, we would go back through our store managers. The store managers of Walmart, who those folks are running. Some of those stores are $100 million businesses. They're running a store with 400 employees that's open 24 hours, 7 days a week. They know their people.
And you know what's funny is you'd say you go to the store managers. Doesn't Sam Walton have a famous line about when you're wanting to know more about your audience, just go to the store?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's what you
It
do.
is
Yeah,
it is in a lot of cases America's Main Street. It's still
yeah. When we were at Universal, when I was at Universal, we were trying to tell guest stories, right? You know, and the documentaries are out right now on YouTube. And yeah, man, it was so funny to like try to like find these families and find these stories and find these angles. And it's like, but what's for the brand? And then, does that tell the message that we want it to do? And you're totally right. And that's not in my question list. But that is something that when you're in the content and storytelling business, that sometimes they happen and they drop in your lap and it's like magic. But a lot of times you're pounding pavements. You're talking to store managers. We were talking to people at the front desk or people that are calling into our call center. We were going through research, and so no, that's a good one. All right, let's kind of shift a little bit. At Walmart and now at TD Bank, you've launched two big storytelling platform hubs. So, I'd say kind of significant content sides of the business. Why is that for you? Like, why is it that when you come in and you've said this is something that we've got to plant our flag in, and this is an avenue for us to do X better for this company?
For me, I walked into two organizations that didn't have storytelling foundations. They didn't have teams in place that were doing storytelling. When I was asked at Walmart to take over the corporate website, there was one other person. It was me and her, and that was it. And so we were very much in the business of sort of getting press releases and being fed content and publishing it. And at some point it dawned on us, like, we're not really telling our story. We need to tell our story. And if we don't tell our story, we're basically seeding the ground for somebody else to tell our story, and they're going to tell it in whatever manner they want to tell it to make their point. And so whether that was organized labor who wanted to paint a picture, whether it was community groups who didn't want us, and so I walked into TD Bank, and TD Bank does not have and did not have when I walked in the door the same kind of sort of reputational issues that needed to be overcome. It's a well-liked bank. It's a popular bank. Our value proposition is unexpectedly human. We're America's most convenient bank, and there might not have been as much a need to tell the story. But then you've got other banks, especially challenger banks, who are out there telling their story. And our lack of telling our story was pretty obvious. And so I had met my boss while I was at Walmart, and he was looking to build out some storytelling and some stronger content opportunities at TD. And so it just really worked out to walk in and pretty much take the same playbook that had worked at Walmart and bring it to TD Bank. And we've been at it now for about 4.5 years. I think that one of my learnings, and I can remember telling John this, my boss, was, I said, it took me 3 years to stand up the team at Walmart in a way that worked. Like, you've got to figure out your processes, you got to figure out creative briefs, you got to figure out how to manage all of this content. Where is it getting distributed? How are we going to amplify it? And it took me 3 years till I got to a point where I said, okay, we're in good shape. And I told John, I said, I can cut that in half. Like, I am not going to repeat the mistakes that I made the first time around. Yeah. It took me 3 years at TD also. And I think some of that is, like, you're coming into an organization, there's a lot of change management.
So confident.
You're trying to navigate people who, not navigate people, but navigate a legacy organization. Sometimes. And so, we were able to plow through it and get to a place where we feel really good about the platform that we have today, as well as the content that we're creating.
Yeah. So let's talk about the platform. So it's been a few years. TD Stories is out there. It's a great site. Go check it out. There's a lot of really great content. I know a couple people that are on Chad's team. Some of them travel the world, I feel like, doing other stuff for themselves. They're just great storytellers on the group. Walk us back a little bit and tell us kind of what was the goal of TD Stories. I think anyone that's thinking about a content strategy and program, it needs to have an anchor. For us, we built out Discover Universal, which was this kind of media company within the company that told these awesome stories about families and guests and the experience. Tell us about TD Stories. Kind of how was it envisioned, and what was it there to create, and the kind of the content strategy, and where are you at today with it?
Yeah, so when I was interviewing, I knew that they were very eager to overhaul what had existed. So there was basically a digital news center, and it was both in Canada and the U.S. So we are a Canadian-owned bank. We are the U.S. subsidiary, and so we have sites in Canada and we have sites in the U.S. So we ran two different newsrooms that were connected by the same back end, and we all agreed: leadership in Canada, leadership in the U.S. My boss, our chief communications officer, all my peers up in Canada. We're not staying current. We're again in a place where we're pushing out press releases, and we're a media hub. We're not storytellers. And then there's marketing, which marketers are hired to drive business growth. So that's what they were doing. We're over here serving media. Well, where's the thing in the middle? Where's the story about our company, about our culture, about our value proposition, about our values? Like, why should people transact with us? So we're telling press what we're doing. Marketing's offering up products and services, but nobody's getting that middle section, which is like, why should I trust you? What makes you guys tick? And so there was we got our teams together respectively from Canada and the US. We built out the sites, and we do have different goals. The brands are distinct to their markets. They are TD Bank is one of 5 banks in Canada. They're either number 1 or number 2, depending on the day and how deposits are going. They are the household brand. They are the Walmart of banks in Canada. I think the number that I used earlier, about 2/3. It's roughly 2/3 of Canadians bank with TD. They are all about confidence. That is their value proposition, is that you can have confidence in TD Bank in Canada. In the U.S., we're a challenger brand. We exist just on the East Coast, from Maine to Florida. Our value proposition is, again, America's most convenient bank, and we're unexpectedly human. And so, as a challenger brand, you have a very different mindset than you do when you're the established number one. And I learned that firsthand at Walmart, and got my hand slapped a couple times when I did some things that were probably not becoming of being that respected market leader. You don't need to be irreverent on social, and you don't need to write content that might badger your competition. That's not what you do when you're the number one household brand. When you're a challenger brand, you're fighting a little bit, and you got to be a little edgy, and you got to differentiate yourself. And so we agreed on a framework. We agreed on what our major content pillars would be, and then we have to localize. So we have an enterprise strategy that we execute in our markets locally because of those differences. And for us, what you'll notice on the US version of TD Stories is we still lean very heavily on those human interest stories, the stories about our colleagues, the stories about the community groups we work with, the stories about our customers. And we know from running some previous content campaigns and looking at the data that that's what grabs people. That's what brings them in to be aware of our brand and consider us. Where we had a gap was when it came to providing advice and guidance to customers around any financial need that they may have, whether that's having a baby or planning for retirement and everything in between. And so when you look at our site, we've put a lot of time and energy into a series we call Money Matters Monday. I'm a sucker for alliteration, so Money Matters Monday works for us. And it is meant to have sort of unbranded financial advice every Monday on a range of topics that we know from looking at search engine keywords and a number of things. These are what people are looking for, so we're trying to be timely. And our hope is that you'll read some of our human interest stories, and you'll read our advice guidance, and you may be inclined to bank with us. If you don't, I think we've still provided sound financial advice that you can take to whatever financial institution you want to go to. You're not going to see a lot of heavy pitching for TD. We hope you come work for us, but our angle from a corporate communication standpoint is a little more of a softer sell, and it's really, I think, what differentiates the Canadian site from the U.S. site is that they don't have to work. They're not the challenger brand up there that we are down here.
Yeah. So going inside the team, I love hearing a little bit of how the content strategy is created. Human interest, colleagues, customers, and then down in kind of that middle of the funnel, the advice. Planning for retirement, like that. I think one of the things that people like you and I love is we love to develop content strategies, understand business, understand audience. What are the topics that we can start to craft stories and narratives around? And so I think that's a reminder to anyone that's out there and thinking about how to build a content strategy. They're so important and they anchor everything. But one other thing is the process at which you come up with ideas, right? Everyone has a different way of coming up with good ideas. What does your creative and or storytelling process look like tied back to the content strategy? And as much as you can, take us inside the room and kind of the team a little bit and break that open. Like, do you have meetings? Do you have pitch sessions? How does some of that functional work happen?
Yeah, and I'll come back to one point you said, which was your content has to be connected to your business goals. And I think that what can happen to true creatives, especially when they come from an outside entity into corporate America, especially, is the creative energy can be displaced because you're trying to be creative, but it's not laddering back to a business goal. This is a fun story to tell, but is it connected to one of our big priorities? And so, to use the Walmart example from earlier, if it didn't connect back to sort of assuring people that our sourcing was coming from domestic manufacturers and that we were treating our associates properly, to what end was the content being created? And so I think you sort of hit on that. So I would encourage people, if you're in a role like ours, that you're always focused on how does this tie back to business goals. So for us, inside the room, again, I talked about how process averse I was when I started my career, and now how dependent upon process I am, because again, when you're at Walmart and you're a 2-person shop and you start to get into storytelling, sure, you can take on one story at a time, but all of a sudden you've got a scale and you've got 300 people in corporate affairs, and all of them want you to be telling stories, and you need a process. And we only have about 50 people at TD, but you still need a process for all of these people who are submitting creative briefs. So we have a briefing process. Our team then evaluates the briefing. We have twice a week scrums where we go through our editorial calendar and we kick around ideas that people have put forward. We have a weekly team meeting. And then one of the things that really worked for us well at Walmart that I have not successfully been able to recreate at TD, and it might be because of the fact that we've got a dispersed workforce, and it also might just be sort of the post-pandemic reality of working from home and working remotely. We had something we call the Friday Free for All. I talked earlier about how I love alliteration. So a Friday Free for All. It was, we had an agency embedded with us in Bentonville, so it was agency led. And every Friday they would bring in creative from other brands that ranged from your Fortune 50 to very obscure brands. There really wasn't a creator community at that point per se, but there were people that we would watch. I think emerging influencers, and we would have everybody in the team. And I think by the time I left, felt like there were 35 people in that room on Friday mornings, but a good time to, have donuts, break bread, and have a very healthy sort of dialogue and discourse and debate on creative. And did we like it?
Yeah.
Did we not want to like it? You quoted Sam Walton earlier. One of his other things was steal shamelessly. And so I had a file of things I wanted to steal. And in a lot of cases, you
already stole something from Coca-Cola earlier. You just keep it going.
Well, a lot of the things that I stole, I asked for permission. I would call the person because I had a decent network, and I would say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this, and what should I do?" But you look at other content for inspiration, and so that was one of those, Eric, that I think you could probably replicate virtually, but it just hasn't stuck.
Yeah, that's hard.
There was just so much energy in the room. And I think that especially when you're looking at creative and you're debating it, and by debating, I mean at times arguing over whether it was something we could pick up and bring to Walmart. I think you lose some of that context virtually, and people don't understand where you're coming from. And I remember a rather lively debate about whether or not we should start a TikTok handle. And my point of view at the time was TikTok is largely, or no, it was Snapchat. Sorry, Snapchat. Now I'm really dating myself. So at that time, the key demographic on Snapchat was 13 to 17-year-olds. Sure. And I was wondering, why would we be on Snapchat talking to people who have no buying power and probably have no perception Walmart. So it was those kinds of conversations about, the creative, was it good? Was the tactic something we wanted to copy, and did it matter for our
Yeah.
business?
Yeah.
But what often happens, because I try to keep my team very light and breezy and chit chatty, and this morning we were talking about the fact that I was at a soccer game last night, and it had nothing to do with work, but it's
Right.
from
Right.
those conversations that all of a sudden somebody will throw out an idea that they
Yeah.
used previously in their life. And we're also big believers in bringing the outside in. I think that when you, as a content team or as a communications team, keep talking to yourself and keep in your
Oh yeah,
team
that's a good
meetings, in
one.
your quarterly reviews, whatever it is. So we've been
The
lucky
ideas just
through our.
become the same.
Yeah, so we've been lucky to have. I've got members on my team who have great networks. So we had Carl Quintanilla come talk to us. We had a, an author that I found who actually turned out to be a TD customer when he lived on the East Coast. Like, I just tweeted him and asked if he'd come talk to our team meeting. We had Jeremiah Oweng a couple weeks ago to talk to us about AI. So, having those kinds of folks come in
That's good.
and give you a bit of a look at what the rest of the world is doing really has spurred a lot of creativity.
Yeah, that's good. There's a lot I want to get to, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So there's a few ones that I'm going to try to, maybe we can bang through pretty quickly. They're all so good though. This one's really about buy-in and measurement, right? I'm tying those together so I could try to skip a question. So how do you measure to tell the story back to the organization in a space where numbers can at times be a bit more squishy? And then how do you take that and really navigate it for buy-in? Because what you are doing is new everywhere you've gone, at least the last two big ones, right? And same thing for me whenever I was at Universal. And there's a lot of that. And I think that's the question that people like you or me get asked if we ever step off stage somewhere after doing a talk. We're like, how did you get a chance to do this? How did you get buy-in? How did you influence? But I think measurement's tied into that. So give us a minute or so just on what that looks like for you and kind of how you would advise people to tackle that, having probably done it in a handful of different ways.
Yeah, I'm probably not the world's greatest person to talk about buy-in, because I've walked into two organizations that already had leadership in place that understood the value.
Yeah,
and I'm actually working on a project.
But that matters, right?
Yeah, it
like,
does.
I think that's a big deal when you're deciding what job you want to take.
Yeah,
if you go
absolutely.
in somewhere you have to push something uphill, just know that's tough. When you go somewhere where there's wind behind you, it's so much different.
I mean, I've had to get buy-in for like the idea of the Walmart podcast, but for content in general, not really. I walked into a place that understood the value, and I've got a CEO now at TD who really understands the value and really pays attention to our content, which is great. But more importantly, to the measurement. The double-edged sword of being in corporate communications as opposed to being in marketing is that corporate communications historically has been able to live with very squishy metrics. We look at impressions, you look at share of voice, you look at, ad equivalency with earned media, you look at time on site, you look at, a lot of very squishy things. And that's great because it's not as cut and dry, right? When you go in for your report card, if your report card is P&L and you're a marketer and you've spent X on an ad and it has generated less than X in revenue, I think you're probably in trouble. Corp Comms doesn't quite have that same dynamic to it. So that's great when it comes to being able to craft your own story around measurement. It sucks then, to your point about continued buy-in. Yeah. Yes, I bought in originally. I hired you. You're doing it, but I'm not going to give you any more money until you can prove to me that your content's working. So that is why you then need to develop a measurement framework that reports out. So for us, again, it's about awareness, it's about favorability, and it's about consideration. And they're different from market to market. So in a place like Boston, for instance, where we've got the TD Garden, awareness, not an issue. I would not run content in Boston trying to build awareness of the brand. I would focus more on consideration or favorability. In other markets, I'm going to focus on some different things. Charlotte, we've just entered the Charlotte market. I may put content down in Charlotte that is clearly meant to build awareness. What we're now going to need to do with this next campaign is we're going to need to start to show some business growth opportunities that have come from our content. So we're actually building out a framework and a scorecard right now that we're doing in partnership with marketing to see how our brand storytelling and our marketing content can work together to drive some of the business outcomes that are imperative for us. So measurement is key. to ongoing success. It's easy to walk in and have support to build out a content team, but if you can't prove it, sooner or later your funding is going to run out, your role could run out, support for your role could run out. So you got to keep proving that what you're doing is working.
Yeah, I always tell people, be loud. Literally, talk about what you're doing. Use the sexy appeal of content to be part of the momentum, and then back it up with data that's tied back to business goals. And if you do that, and you've got smart leaders, right? Modern marketing leaders, I feel like that you'll be in pretty good standing. So another thing that I know that we all deal with, I'm sure you saw the McDonald's grimace meme that happened, and I'm sure there was part of you that was like, man, I wonder what it's like in that room. We're putting our brand in the hands of customers every day when they've got a cell phone and some piece of anything, right? Or even a physical building like TD Bank has. We've got to get comfortable with that, but that sometimes can be a little bit uncomfortable, especially in the world that you're in from a corporate communication standpoint. How can you prepare for those moments so your leadership and your team aren't taken off guard? And also, is there a way to actually leverage those moments? I think back years ago when Tiger was the face of Tiger PGA Tour at EA Sports, and there was a bug where Tiger could walk out on the water, and everyone was talking about this before things went super viral. And EA Sports created a video where they just said that wasn't a bug, he's just that good. And they had the real Tiger walk out into a lake and hit a shot and put it right in the hole in 2 weeks after that bug got released. Not many brands are that nimble and or that creative with how they talk about some of the negativity they get from the brand, but just talk about how you can better prepare for those moments so you're not caught off guard and you might even be able to leverage it a little bit.
Yeah, from my vantage point, I view those things as probably in the world of like reputation management and crisis communications. Like somebody came into a Walmart or somebody came into a TD Bank, they had a bad experience, they've recorded the whole thing, and you've got your crisis response plan in place. And I think every decent corporation with every great chief communications officer has a built-in response plan. It covers everything. At Walmart, the spectrum of things that could happen in a store was wild. And then I think a lot of companies built out a playbook shortly after Donald Trump was elected, because he would take to Twitter in the middle of the night and could crater stock prices. So I can remember being in the room when we had a whole plan, 2016, I guess he got elected, building out a whole plan just in case he mentioned the brand.
That's crazy that you got to have that.
Yeah, because I think he did it to GM or Ford one night. You woke up in the morning and it's like, okay, So I think that and then there were opportunities where you'd have people come into a store, and I can remember they picked up like ukuleles or something at Walmart, and we ended up having them to one of our Saturday morning meetings or big meetings where you saw a customer video, and we had a kid who sang, and there's a lot of different ways that marketing can leverage those. But I again am a little bit more heavily weighted toward looking out for those moments for how we might have to mitigate a problem that happened, because I don't know that a bank is set up the way a Walmart is, where there's these great moments of joy where somebody's going to film something viral that happened in a store that's actually good news. I think that in the past, there's some campaigns that have come out of Toronto, and the first time I got to know TD Bank was when they did the TD Thanks You, and somebody went to an ATM, they put their card in, and then a Toronto Blue Jay guy came out of the ATM to like surprise them, and that was cool. Like that was cool. So you leverage those opportunities, but I sort of have maybe a jaded view as to what the public can do with a phone in their hand and what it means for your brand.
Yeah, but you're in a different brand, right? You're not consumer product. You're not an entertainment brand. Even Walmart, you were the leader in banking. Like, you're highly regulated, right? There's only so much we didn't talk about that, but so I get why that's I get the take on that. So I love what you've done at Walmart, TD Bank, but many organizations have smaller corporate communications teams, or maybe they're just starting to build them out, and they've got big visions of building reputational storytelling and what we could tell, and we could tell team member stories and DEI stories, and they're just now trying to figure out what does that look like? How do we build the team? What are some thoughts you might give to them? Where should they start?
Get yourself a good writer or two. To me, I think still
Comes
so
back to
much
writing.
comes back to writing. I've got two fantastic writers. They are amazing, and they come from different backgrounds. One in entertainment, one came from sort of banking, and then reporting. They're wired a little bit differently, but man, do they know how to hit deadlines and crank out great stories and find the right angle. And the power of what they do is the follow-up question. It
Mhm.
is. It is. You can always tell when somebody hasn't done their homework when they come in with like 5 questions and they don't ask the follow-up when the interview subject gives you the perfect area to pivot into a story you didn't even know you were going to tell. And then I've got a videographer who does the same thing. Like, we
Yeah.
came to do a video about this, and while the camera was turned off or we were setting up the lights, the subject mentioned something, and Anthony will come back with a completely different story than what we thought we were going to get, and it's amazing. It's like the dream. So
That's such a good tip.
yeah, you got to get a couple. I'd start with a writer if your budget allows for it. Bringing on a videographer. Again, our industry is so heavily regulated that the choices that we have when it comes to platforms that we can use for the web or for social are much smaller than some other industries. And so I think there are ways to build cheap and cheerful websites these days. You don't need, Adobe Experience Manager. You don't need to spend $1 million on a CMS. I think you can do it much easier. So if you're working in a place where budgets are tough, then I think you can do a lot of that your own. I think to your point earlier, I think there are brands and there are industries where UGC or user generated content can help you bridge the gap between what you can do in house and what you can do out of house. And so again, I think that I started my career and realized pretty quickly when I got to Walmart that I had a bit of a deficiency when it came to hiring. And I fell into a trap that a lot of people do in terms of hiring people like myself. You start to have a conversation, you realize you have a lot in common. And the next thing you know, you got 5 people who all like Penn State and the Dallas Cowboys and play golf. And you all think the same way about content. And what you really need is somebody who comes in who's completely the opposite of you. And you need to hire to fill your gaps. So if you're a great writer and you really understand writing, then maybe your first hire isn't a writer. Maybe it's a videographer like I have who comes from a world that I don't fully understand. I have a deep appreciation for what he does, but it's a gap that I have. Some of the social media stuff is a gap that I have. So if you think about your team, think about where you're weak. And that in a lot of ways is the sign of a great hire and a great people manager, is that you're not insecure about hiring people who have more talent than you do in certain areas.
So a couple of things I heard there: hire people that can see stories, even though they're not the first story. I love that. That's why you're hiring people that are journalists, broadcasters. They just kind of think in the form of like a story or an angle. And then you're dropping some leadership tips on how to hire. And then at the end of this, I got to ask how my follow-up questions have been, because it sounds like you're very good at judge of follow-up questions. So hopefully this has gone to your standard. All right. So one last long one, or longer form question here, and then we'll jump into just a quick lightning round of some fun ones. But I think this is important because it's really about the innovation and the future of corporate communications. So with so much new content, like creators that are out there, they are literally dominating devices, viewership, way more than Super Bowls and late night TV. Whether it's Mr. Beast or it's new creators popping up on TikTok that are out there getting attention. How do you evolve and innovate how you create stories for corporate communications and share them in a way that that people listen? What can you learn from people like this and this new media storytellers to influence how you tell stories from a corporate communication standpoint?
I think you answered the question. It's learning from what is working with other creators and on other platforms, because what works on one platform, you and I both know, may not work on others. They're built different. The algorithms treat the content different. They're constantly changing their algorithms. So what works one day might not work the next day. Over investing in what have become rented platforms. I think if I had it to do all over again, and you realize that you're investing in building an audience on Facebook or one of those other channels that you actually don't own. They own it, and you're renting the space. So I'm looking for what other creatives are doing that is impactful and is working, that can be replicated in our industry in a way that works for TD Bank, is really what I keep my eye on.
Yeah, is there a way? Sorry to interrupt you. Is there a way to take some of that and apply it, or do you look at Corp Comms and go, I don't know, we're a little more I don't want to say traditional because you're not doing traditional storytelling, but a little bit more of a traditional audience maybe, or, you're not going to do the same type of editing you'd see on TikTok or captioning, or, does that even influence? Or are you like, no, we need to be hearing all of these things and then kind of find a way to apply what we think is going to work?
Yeah, I go to the latter, and I would say that we're coming to the end of a pilot that we've been doing on thought leadership. And one of the things that we've done, because we're not going to be on TikTok anytime soon, is we've taken a format that we know works there, and we've adapted it to work with one of our thought leaders on Instagram. So it's not a one for one, but it's inspiration that then led to an idea that could be replicated in an environment that works for TD Bank. So again, I think you got to keep your mind open to everything. You got to keep your mind open to content that might aggravate you. You got to pay attention to brands that you may find to be not ones that you like, because you never know where the great idea is going to come from.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's something I've been trying to do in the newsletter on Mondays, is to really try to look for where's content happening that's like different and wouldn't normally come across my feed that we can share out. All right, so we're going to hit some music here, and we got a quick lightning round, few questions, short answers. The first one is the best piece of content you and your team have ever created, and the worst. The worst is no offense to anyone, but it's something you tested, you tried, you're out there battling and taking swings, but it's okay. Something doesn't work out. So best and worst, what is it?
Oh, God. The second part of the question is much easier than the first, because we really believe that we're creating great content at TD on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes a particular piece of content takes off that you weren't expecting. And so I think about a lot of that content that we've done. I think that TD is a sponsor of a road race in New York City called the Achilles Hope and Possibility, and it is the largest road race for people with diverse abilities, and so it's all about diversity and inclusion. And there's some amazing stories that come out of that. And I think from a personal standpoint, I love those stories that we've been able to tell. It was not a bad piece of content, but it is an example of when we took a flyer on something that actually didn't really ladder back to business goals. Walmart was the exclusive distributor of a Stephen King novel along the way, and we did a full Walmart Today takeover, where when you went to the site, it was a Stephen King interstitial. He wrote a foreword specifically for us, and I think our visitors were like, what in the world have I landed on? This was not what I expected. We were trying to help sell some books and drive sales, but it was one of those that I look back on and thought, I think we tried too hard to be marketers, and we're not marketers. Dude. And that would have probably been better off in their hands.
We did something for HHN Halloween Horror Nights at Universal one time, and it was like an ASMR, like where people just like get close to the mic and they do these weird sounds. And it was, I don't know, you can definitely get too trend hacky in the world of content, where you need to kind of just like, no, let's slow down and focus on what we know. All right, where are you getting content inspiration from today? Is it a book? Is it a podcast? Is it this conversation?
I'm a voracious reader, and I've actually sort of taken a break from podcasting. I'm listening to audiobooks. So I don't usually read more than one book at a time, but I'm reading, I'm rereading, which I've never really done. I don't go back to books that I've read because I'm like, I know the story. Like I painted the picture in my head the first time. So I think that reading a lot inspires a lot of ideas, and fiction, nonfiction.
What's the book you're going back to read right now?
Everything. I'm going back through James Patterson series, Michael Connelly's probably my favorite because he's had so much adapted now for Netflix. So Lincoln Lawyer, and Bosch. From a brand standpoint, I think one of the tricky things when we get asked, where do you look for inspiration, is that the person that's usually asking that question is a senior leader who wants you to dazzle them with a big brand that they've heard of. They ask you, who's best in class? And if you say some fledgling or emerging brand that they've never heard of, they're going to look at you like you're cross-eyed. So you have to say something like Chipotle or Red Bull, which are great. But the reason that I hesitate to say that I look for Red Bull for inspiration is like their content is their product. So
Sure.
if I had a balloon that would go up to 6,000 feet in outer space and I could drop somebody from the balloon, I would have killer content. I don't. I have a bank. So
they're throwing out money as they're going through the sky, and
yeah.
TD Bank is on their front of their.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love Lego. Do they do some things that are dazzling? Yeah, but it's product based. But I still love Lego. Merriam-Webster, of all places, is a great source for inspiration because it's a dictionary. Like, how exciting can you get with a dictionary? And yet, them on their social handles are, and what they're trying to do on social is, it's great, it's witty, it's clever, and I think there's ways that you can be witty and clever and creative without breaking all of your brand standards.
By the way, another sneaky place is Chad Mitchell on Twitter. You're kind of sneaky funny. Like it's mostly Penn State comedy. But there's something, I think that Chad's worth a follow if you're looking for a little bit of entertainment. Yeah, I don't know, maybe just me.
I would like that, but I would tell you that the person you'll see on Twitter is probably not even a reasonable facsimile of how irate I would get during sports or other things that I can't comment on because both
you
my
have
kids.
A private channel
no, I
for
don't.
that
I don't.
ranting?
My wife, and at Walmart we used to call it like things that Chad would tweet out loud. So things I wouldn't put on Twitter, I would just scream in the office, and I think I probably wore out my welcome there by just tweeting anything out loud that I wanted to.
I've got a group me chat with some buddies of mine from college, and I'm like, that's not okay for Twitter, but I'll go over here to my buddies and I'll complain about what just happened to the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah.
All right, two quick ones, last ones here. Most important skills to have on your team, right? I think that's I think I already know the answer to this. It's writers. You're like in love with writers. Am I right?
I am in love with writers, but I think that I think that having the courage of your convictions is probably even more important, because we're in a world where we've got to constantly be rethinking what we're doing. We've got to be pressure testing. We got to be checking ourselves at the door. And I try to create an environment where everybody's opinion counts and where I am happy to be proven wrong as many times as it takes in order to, find the right mix with content. I don't know everything. I'm constantly learning. I'm seeking out
and stealing.
Yeah, and stealing. But I think that those and just being a good team player and just being open-minded to creativity, but also understanding then that we work in a world that again is heavily regulated, and you can't just go bonkers with content. Do whatever you want to. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough resources to try and chase trends. We've got to stay on message.
So interesting little segue for the last one. If you could snap your fingers and have one thing from this list, what would it be and why? Thinking about it from this point of view, what would exponentially increase your ability to tell this TD story? Got it? More money, more people, more autonomy.
I don't need more autonomy.
Wow, not many people would say that. That's awesome. Good for you.
I had great leaders, great bosses at Walmart who gave me a very wide and long license to operate, and I have the same at TD. And I think that I bring in at least a little bit of intelligence to understand how to navigate that world and bring to life the stories that we publish, and have never really gotten marched into the principal's office to have to explain a story or something that we've done on social. So I think I've been all right there. So the autonomy, I'm all right. I will not money complain about autonomy. Money, because I think that look, the reality is, and I've been saying this now. Let's say I was at Walmart in 2010, so I guess I've been saying this for close to 14 years. I want $2 for amplification for every $1 that I spend on content creation. And to your point, TD Bank or even our number one competitor, JP Morgan Chase, they're not going to cut through the noise or the exceptional content that is being created by truly creative people out there. We've got to amplify our content all the time to break through. And so I think money is probably the thing that matters the most.
Well, dude, we went way longer than I was planning on, but it's always a pleasure to chat. And I think that people that have kind of listened and gotten to this point, I mean, I think they got a really good understanding of what does it mean to be a leader and trying to build corporate communications for big brands. And that was kind of the goal. And hopefully we had a little bit of fun.
Always
thanks
fun
for your
chatting
time.
with you. Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll I'm sure we'll do this again. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Radical content, another episode in the books, all about corporate communication storytelling. Super excited for you guys to hear this one. All right, we'll be back in a couple weeks, and we appreciate you guys listening.